On this day, 24th of November, 1989, the top communist officials in Czechoslovakia resign. This was the beginning in some ways and the end in other ways of a great awakening in Czechoslovakia. Obviously, Czechoslovakia doesn't exist anymore. It's Czechia, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Now, in 1989, the entire communist world collapsed, almost, except for that big red one in Asia. But 1989, you have to remember that things had been going on all year. Poland had already arranged an election. The Polish communist government had resigned. Solidarity was coming in to power. The Communist Party in Hungary had also given up power. East Germany, there had been massive protests in Leipzig, Dresden, and in Berlin, eventually. On the 9th of November, the Berlin Wall fell. There were rumblings and demonstrations in Romania and Bulgaria. Mongolia was about to get rid of their Communist Party as well. In China, just 6 months before, Tiananmen Square had taken place, in which possibly tens of thousands or more had been killed, not just in Beijing, not just in the square, but around China. And right now, China was in lockdown. In the past, protests such as what that happened in Prague in 1989 had been put down. People were arrested. People were imprisoned. They were persecuted. They would lose their jobs. Their families would lose their jobs. They'd be denied travel passes, because you needed a pass to travel back then in communist countries. So unlike anywhere today. They would deny you a nice place to live. You would be a pariah if you came into contact with government authorities and annoyed them. But with the entire communist world collapsing around them, and it's not just what was happening in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union was rumbling. Armenia and Azerbaijan were fighting each other in the Karabakh. There was fighting in the stands in Central Asia. The Baltic states were protesting and declaring sovereignty and demanding independence. There were protests throughout the Soviet Union. Things weren't looking good for communism. This, I think, led the top guys in Prague to decide that they weren't going to use force as they had done before. We already saw that there was force used in China that had been condemned, but there wasn't much that could be done because China is such a big place, so far away. Very soon, violence would be used by Ceausescu on his people. And on Christmas Day, he would end up with his wife being shot live on television. These were turbulent times. And they did the sensible thing. They resigned, and there was no violence in Czechoslovakia. Even when the Czech Republic and Slovakia decided to end their union, they did it amicably. They didn't do it with violence, which was probably best in the long run. So, on the 28th of this month, the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia will relinquish power 2 days later, on the 30th, the Parliament of Czechoslovakia will remove a clause from its constitution stating that the Communist Party is the only party allowed to stand or rule in Czechoslovakia. The Communists had seized power in 1948, 25th of February. At the end of the Second World War, Czechoslovakia was the only country that was a democracy in Eastern Europe, in the Soviet-occupied zone. Obviously Stalin didn't want that, but he couldn't just go in and kick out the president of Czechoslovakia. It would look bad. So he waited, bided his time. By 1948, he was ready. And they overthrew the government and seized power. And again, there wasn't very much that could be done from the other side of the Iron Curtain. So, another thing that happened around this time that helped spur the protests, in August, East Germans had started pouring in to Prague because East Germans were allowed to go on holiday to other communist countries. They started going to Prague. Before that, they had gone to Hungary, and Hungary, because it was opening up, they'd started pulling down their fence. Many thousands of East Germans went on holiday, quote unquote, to Lake Balaton, and then they would go to the border of Austria and walk across. They would be given asylum, or they'd be given access to West Germany. Many tens of thousands doing this. It was embarrassing the East German government. So they banned holidays to Hungary, but they continued to allow people to go to Prague or Czechoslovakia. And so many thousands of East Germans were turning up outside the West German embassy in Prague. They eventually occupied it and demanded that they be transported to West Germany. Eventually, they were, at the beginning of November. But then, a few days later, the wall fell down. So the Czechs are watching all of this around the world. They're watching what's happening in the Soviet Union, Poland, East Germany, Hungary, China. And they're saying, why are these guys still here? But they're still afraid at this point. Well, on the 16th of November, it was the 50th anniversary of the storming of Prague universities by the Nazis. And they killed students during that. So that was during the German occupation. So they came out to protest, or to commemorate this date. They thought they'd be safe doing this because it's safe in a communist country to protest the Nazis or fascists. But this was what instigated and turned into the protests that led to the Velvet Revolution. So, the 16th it began. On the 18th, students and theatres started to strike. It had already become an anti-communist protest. After this, there were false reports of a student that had been killed by the authorities. Apparently no one had been killed, but people believed that they had been, or there had been. So more and more people started going on strike, coming out and protesting. On the 20th of November, a permanent strike was declared. There was not much they could do in response. They could unleash the authorities on them, Tiananmen style, but Czechoslovakia is not China. It's not closed, never has been as closed as China. It's not as big. You can't close off the borders and everyone will disappear and go quiet. So the communist officials were in a panic. Every day, hundreds of thousands of people were outside their windows, chanting down with the government. finally, on this day, the 24th, all the top communists decided to throw in the towel. That's a very good thing they did. Very quickly, Czechoslovakia held elections. Václav Havel, the imprisoned playwright, was elected the president. Parliamentary elections followed, and the communists were swept out of power. And today, the Czech Republic is a relatively free nation, as free as one can get. But they don't have internal passports anymore. They don't lose their jobs if they displease the authorities anymore, I think. Anyway, if you like this channel and these videos, please subscribe, comment, like, and come back tomorrow for some more.